Xiang, who's come all the way out from sunny San Diego, California, to speak with us. I met Professor Lau in Brussels at the Tibet Sport Group Conference in September, and he gave a very interesting talk at that time on Ming Dynasty records and their description of Tibet and the Ming Dynasty. So today we've invited him to come in. We have about 2 hours or so, and he will talk primarily, I think, on the Ming Dynasty and Qing Dynasty records, which, well, I won't say too much about what he's going to say, he'll say this up, but, so please welcome Professor Lau. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present some of this research work that I've been doing for the past several years after I retired. Now, my original training was not in history, okay, it was in engineering and business administration. I figured that after I retired, I thought to do something great. Anyway, so I'm going to skip it because much of these things are, I think we have only one Chinese who can read Chinese, right? Am I correct? Is there anybody else who can read Chinese? Okay, so I have some of this material that I designed primarily for the Chinese, and since there's no Chinese, I don't need to do this. So let's start from this one. The PRC, of course, as you know, the claim is that Tibet has been part of China since antiquity, and they started out years ago by interpreting antiquity as back in Tang Dynasty, which is like 600, 700 AD. They have since revised it, so right now the claim is that Tibet became part of China since Yuan Dynasty. So my research, okay, is to look at Chinese official and contemporaneous records to see whether they show that Tibet was indeed part of China in the Yuan Dynasty or the Ming Dynasty and the Qing Dynasty. So each dynasty has to look at the records. And of course, I don't need to go back beyond Qing Dynasty because in the PRC now that you say that Tibet became part of China before Yuan Dynasty. And in this discussion, I'll use Tibet in a very special way, and that's just to mean Tibet autonomous region of today, because the area that's in Qinghai and Xikang and Sichuan, they become a little bit sort of troublesome, okay, murky, so we want to just simplify the issue. I will skip this because I think the members of this audience, you all know about some of the recent history. So, what I will try to do is, for each dynasty, Yuan, Ming, Qing, and the Republic of China, I'll prove that Tibet was independent of China from the perspective of each of the various administrative aspects, classification, labeling of regions, taxation, tributes, census records, education, blah, 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 and so forth. Okay, the second part I will use to get individual events. So you want to try to look at whether a place is part of a certain country. You need to know that sort of different aspects. So that's what I do. And the documents that I use, okay, because actually my research, the primary purpose of my research is to try to convince the Chinese that, look, this is not your place. You basically occupy the place somebody doesn't occupy it, okay? And my assumption is that we're not going to trust the Western imperialists, we're not going to trust the Tibetans, okay? Let's look at Chinese official records, okay? So my material would have to satisfy these requirements. Number one is written by Chinese, primarily Han, some Manchurian. They were written before 1949. In other words, to be fair, I'm not going to trust the Chinese communists either. So let's look at Chinese records written by Chinese but before 1949. But these records will have to be published in China between the Yuan Dynasty, which is in the 13th century, to the beginning, the mid-20th century. And then they should have been also republished and printed by the People's Republic of China. In other words, I want to use records that have been verified and accepted, okay, by the People's Republic of China as valid documents. And then, of course, not only that, most of these documents actually can be found from websites or databases that are operated by the People's Republic of China. So I'm using only data that the People's Republic of China recognizes and accepted as authoritative by the Chinese people. In other words, don't believe in a single word I say, check it out. This is supposed to be sincere to the Chinese, but to this audience, it sounds sarcastic because there's no way to verify anything in country Chinese. I don't mean to be sarcastic, so I'm sorry about it. So anyway, so this is the structure of my presentation today. I'll start out with some, but actually I'll skip the basic concept also. I think it's because given this audience, I don't need to go to the basic concept. I'll just explain very briefly the structure of Chinese history documents. And then after that, the primary objectives would be, number one, I'll start with Ming Dynasty. We'll talk about the administrative aspect. Remember, we talked about many aspects like taxation and census records, education. We don't have time to go through all of those, so I'll just pick one topic: classification of Chinese versus foreign regions, and see how that would prove or disprove as to whether China had sovereignty over Tibet. And then I'll use one of the many individual events. Okay, this story is about the Emperor Ming who tried to invite a living Buddha monk from Tibet, and see how the story develops. And then after that, I'll go to Qing Dynasty, and then the same thing. But this time, I'll pick more than one aspect. I'll look at the foreign versus Chinese regions, the geographic documents, and then I'll talk about census and residency, registry, citizenship, and stuff like that. And then for the individual event, I'll talk about the Guru massacre, and then we'll see how these things would reflect as to whether China had sovereignty over Tibet. The secondary objective, I'll be very blunt about it, is that this what actually motivated me to go into this research is that when I go into these Chinese documents as a Chinese, I was just amazed, at how ridiculous those lies were, and just sort of demonstrate how PLC falsifies some of the Chinese historical records. And please don't laugh at me when I say this, okay? Chinese records are really very honest and very accurate, and I think most Tibetans say, what, are you joking? No, I'm not joking, okay? There's a big difference between Chinese records and PLC records. Okay? Chinese records are very reliable, okay? You will find it funny is because the only Chinese records you're familiar with are the PLC records. So this is, again, I'm going to skip this because, okay. So start out with the part about structure of Chinese historical records. Why do you have to do that? I think if you remember what you studied in high school, you look at things like, Pythagoras theorem, you look at things like what is H2O. The source is not important. It doesn't matter whether Einstein really discovered it or Pythagoras actually discovered it, because you don't have to believe in these people. You can empirically prove these things yourself. History is different. History, you have to cite the source. You say, who told you so? Well, ultimately is that. Why should I listen to you? Okay? You have to come up with a source, okay, that's reliable. So for a Chinese, what are the reliable sources? Because I'm sure as a Tibetan, if you have discussed with the Chinese, you know that, well, you have totally different versions, okay? And each side is, is accusing the other side of lying. So who is lying? Who should I believe in? Okay? So anyway. For the Chinese, okay, there are standard accepted sources that are believed to be reliable, and I honestly think that they are reliable. Okay? And one, of course, we start out by what is called the comprehensive, what is known as the 四库全书, okay? And it's a comprehensive 4 libraries, and it's an actual collection of 3,400. Is basically all the important books that sort of was written, okay, in the past 3,000 years. And then it was collected, and then they were edited, okay, and then they were published by Qianlong, the Emperor Qianlong in Qing Dynasty. Okay? So you have very reliable sort of manuscripts, okay, of passwords and whatever. And the reason why it's called the 4 libraries because it has 4 sections: scriptures, histories, writings of sages, the collectibles of major scholars. And of course, we're only interested in this part, okay, the histories. Okay? In Chinese, it's called 经史子集, okay, and we'll look at history now. And we'll see how Chinese people write or compile historical records. First of all, for many centuries, there's this system where you have daily records that are prepared for each emperor. Literally, the name is Rising and Living Records. In other words, you have somebody that will follow the emperor the moment he rises from bed, and then you keep all the records in the diary and so forth. Okay? And that is kept for the entire reign of this emperor. After an emperor dies, the successor usually the son of whoever, will then appoint an editorial board consisting of some of the leading scholars and some of the senior officers, and then they will then prepare, a set of what you call veritable records for that emperor, okay, after the death of that emperor. And then, at the end of each dynasty, the succeeding dynasty will then again appoint an editorial board to go to the veritable records of all the emperors of the preceding dynasty, and then come up with what is called the official history of that dynasty. And they will use not only the veritable records, but then they will use other original documents, such as the submissions from officials and imperial edicts and so forth. Okay? So these are all available, not only from libraries, but they are available from websites, some of them operated by the PRC. And these are original documentation that, most people don't know they exist and don't read them, but you actually go to that places and you see that they are sort of very revealing, to say the least, as I'll show you after. So, what I have just gone through is what we call primary sources in history. The primary sources now will be developed into semi-primary sources, and in China, the Chinese, we have what's called the 24 history. That is all the dynasties, okay, that went back that goes back all the way to the Han Dynasty, okay, that's the first, but before that there were other sort of official histories too, but if you're talking about the 24 histories or 25 history, first one is historical records, and there was a Han Dynasty, and then of course, we are only interested in the last two actually, Ming history and Qing history for us. And Ming history, of course, was sort of compiled in the Qing Dynasty, and this was at that time the Prime Minister. They usually appoint the top scholar or the Prime Minister as the chief editor, okay, preparing this thing. In the Qing history, the chief editor is Zhao Xi. Many of you probably have heard of his brother, if not him, Zhao Feng. Zhao Feng, of course, was known as the Butcher, Tibet is the Butcher of Tibet. But you see, Zhao Xi himself was the governor of Sichuan, was the governor of Manchuria, was one of the very senior officials, so he knew what he was talking about. And when I say that, these Chinese history records are very, very honest and reliable, and it's when you, especially as Tibetans, if you read what's written by this guy, you see the fact he was actually quite honest about what happened between China and Tibet. Okay, it's not like he's always just telling people how righteous China was and how wrong the Tibetans were. You can actually see. Okay, so they actually sort of and these documents, okay, they've also one example of a large number of documents that are called imperially commissioned documents, and there are many sets of imperially commissioned documents commissioned by various emperors throughout the dynasties. And these are the most authoritative records, okay, which states the position of the Chinese government. Now, you might disagree with what the Chinese government thinks, but at least that is the official position. Okay, that's what they would say. So, the Chinese name for these official histories, 正史, okay, means not only official history, it literally means correct history. Okay, and that's what the Chinese believes as these are the correct ones. Okay, now you're being sarcastic or you're being well, we'll see. Okay, we'll see what the contents are like, and then you have a very different idea, a different impression of what Chinese records are. Anyway, so this is only of relevance if you know Chinese, and I'm just trying to tell that there are all these free databases and all these websites you can go and read about these things and check everything I say. So, I have gone through the first part now, okay, today's scope and structure. I finished the brief introduction. So right now, let's move on to Ming Dynasty. Okay, I'm going to demonstrate the use of Chinese primary and semi-primary records to prove that Tibet was independent of China during Ming Dynasty. Okay, and I'm going to look at the first aspect and the only aspect that we can afford to talk about, and the classification of Chinese versus foreign region. Okay, so let's see how these Chinese documents talk about Tibet. We're talking about Ming Dynasty. Okay, remember, we're talking about the question, was Tibet part of the Ming Dynasty empire of China? Okay? And so first of all, I took the PRC version. The most authoritative statement by the PRC government is given by this set of records. It's called the Historical Historical Atlas of China, and you go to Baidu. Incidentally, okay, I use Baidu for background information, again for the same reason, and that is the PRC blocks Wikipedia in China. Most people in China have no access to Wikipedia, and the PRC provides an alternative to the Chinese, which is called Baidu. So you know, go to Baidu and get information. So right now, what I'm saying is that whenever I need background information, I use Baidu. I'm always using the Chinese background material. Okay, in other words, you say that I'm using your material to prove that they're wrong. That's basically what I'm trying to do. Okay, so this is from Baidu. Okay, and actually, if you look at Chinese Wikipedia, the Chinese version of Wikipedia, actually you see the same thing. And it's actually this historical atlas of China. It's an 8-volume set. It's most prestigious. It's done by a scholar who's highly respected. You're given awards. And China claims that it's one of the 2 foundation-laying achievements in the field of history of China since the PRC time. Okay, so this is the most authoritative statement. And you look at their statement of what constitutes the Ming Dynasty. This is the Chinese Empire, the Ming Dynasty. So you can see that the white regions that are around, that is outside China. Okay? Anything that's colored is within China. Okay? So PRC's position is this, and that's all this colored area, that is China. But during the Ming period, Mongolia wasn't yet part of the Ming Empire. It's China, but not part of the Ming Empire. Xinjiang is China, but it's not part of the Ming Empire. However, Tibet is part of the Ming Empire. Okay? And Manchuria is part of the Ming Empire. So this is the statement, again, of the PRC government, and all the Chinese who are brought up and educated in China would have learned it, and it never occurred to them to doubt the validity or the truthfulness of this thing. Incidentally, for those of you who know a little bit about Chinese history, you probably, I don't know how many of you have heard of this person by the name of Wu Sangui. Have you heard of Wu Sangui? Yeah. Anybody has heard of Wu Sangui? Okay, you have, okay. we have a Caucasian. No, Wu Sangui is actually, at my time, and then it was the arch traitor of China. Okay, he was the one that enabled the Manchurians, okay, to come in and conquer China and turn it into Qing Dynasty. It's amusing that according to the PRC interpretation of history, then this traitor wasn't a traitor because he was not letting the foreigners in. He was already part of China. Okay, it was a unification. So actually, Wu Sangui was no more a traitor. He becomes actually a national hero to speed up unification. Okay. Sorry, I don't mean to pick on you. You've never heard of Wu Sangui? Okay. I was hoping the Chinese can support me in this thing. Okay. No, I'm sorry. I apologize. I don't mean to. But anyway, so as you can see, this is still part of China. Okay? So this is PRC's position as taught to all the Chinese today. Okay? So let's see what Ming history says. Remember I said that Chinese, the correct history, 24 histories, the subsequent dynasty, the succeeding dynasty will then prepare the history of the preceding dynasty. So Ming dynasty, the Ming history was of course prepared by the scholars of Qing dynasty. Okay? And again, if you go to Baidu, you will see this description. Basically, if you go to Baidu, you will see that it tells you that this is the most authoritative set of records that we have on Ming history. Okay? And this is just an example website where you can go to this website, which is the collaboration of the United States and People's Republic of China in making all these classical documents available for free. You can download the whole book, okay? Thousands of pages of it. Yeah? So anyway, this is the table of contents of the Ming history. Okay? And this thing, what is this? Okay. This part actually says Ming history, 350. Actually, it doesn't matter. It's scroll number, okay? It's volume number. And I don't remember the number. Okay. This happens to be 315, okay? So this number is 315, and then you're talking about various, sorry. Yeah, this one. This is 315. And then over there, Yunnan province, you have Burma, and then you have Laos, and then this is northern Thailand. In other words, the Chinese empire was never shy in claiming what they consider as part of their empire. Okay, so they're very, very clearly stating that Burma, Myanmar, is part of China, part of the Yunnan province. Okay, and then of course over there northern Thailand and then Laos. Okay, and after that you have volume number 316, and then over there you have foreign country 1, and foreign country 1 is Korea and Vietnam, and then Japan, and then after that you would have 331, okay, and then you have Western Region 3, and then this is the counterpart spiritual religious king of Tibet, and then over here you have the commanding officer of Tibet, okay, and this part is the major proof, okay, used by the PRC as sovereignty over Tibet, is that, look, you know, we appointed this person who carries this Chinese title of Tibet commanding officer, okay, which is a title that's conferred by the Chinese emperor, okay. Now, if you can't be Chinese, you have to just believe in what I say. I mean, there's no way. But anyway, this is actually very misleading, because if you look at the entire structure, you have a totally different impression of actually what's going on. First of all, as I said, this correct history goes back for 2,000 years. Okay? It goes back to Han Dynasty, BC. But all these correct history, or official history, so to speak, they follow the same structure, following the 2,000-year tradition. You start out with the first part of they're all together in the case of Ming history, 332 volumes or scrolls. Okay? The first 24 scrolls will be on the annals of main events. It's like in a calendar of all these major events that happen. And then after that, there will be an astronomic, meteorological earthquakes and stuff like that. And then after that, it will be really the important part this is geography. And there will be a geography section where they catalog every piece of land that belongs to the empire. And over here, geography 1 to 7, and this spans over 300 pages. It's quite a detailed catalog of all the places. And it includes, okay, the 2 capitals, and then of course the 13 provinces, namely, and it's explicitly stated, Shandong, Shanxi, Henan, blah, blah, blah. And so this is how Chinese territories are recorded and recognized, okay? Traditionally, for over 2,000 years, it's a traditional standard format. And in Geography 7, what I showed you was in Geography 7, where in Yunnan, they stated very clearly in the tables of content, and certainly more detailed in the content itself, because, as I said, there are volumes of these things. Burma, Laos, and so forth. Nothing about Tibet is ever mentioned, okay? So, and then after that, they have other important things about the whole country, okay, protocol, blah, 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 so for the economy, taxation, all the records, and then all the lineage of officialdom. And then over here, they also then talk about some of these so-called minority groups. So actually, Burma, and Laos, they are, of course, part of Yunnan province, but then they are ruled by ethnic rulers. In other words, they actually appoint the local rulers to rule these places, even though they're considered as part of China. So these places like Burma and Laos are mentioned again as part of the ethnic rulers. And then after that, relegated to the end of this book, okay, they have, out of 332 volumes, okay, then they have foreign countries 1 to 9, and then, of course, they talk about all these countries that they have relationships with, okay, they have envoys, they come back and forth, and then includes Vietnam, Japan, Holland, and Italy. And then after that, they have Western lands, which is to the last 4 scrolls of Ming history. They talk about Western lands, and in the second last, which is 331, that's where the Tibetan entities appear. What I showed you just now about the commanding officers and so forth, they actually appeared over here. Okay? And so now, if I break down this volume 331, you can see that actually what they show is this. They say, well, yeah, there are these places, in this place that's called Tibet, and there are these religious kings and spiritual kings which have gotten titles from us. And then there's also this country and this country. Western unknown virtuous nation, all the Chinese records later admit that they had no idea where this country is. In fact, they wonder whether this country ever existed. Basically what happened was that an envoy came and said, oh, I'm going to present you tributes, great emperor of China. And the time what happens is that the emperor made it known to the whole world that if you come and give me $1 of gifts, I'll give you a reward, of $10. So there are all these people who really treated the Chinese emperors as a real sucker. So they came and so this office, so what happened? This guy from one country, I said, oh, I'm from this country. They collected tributes and then and then the power was here. And then after that, of course, this is this officer commander. And then the last scroll, then you have Western Lands number 4, which they have places like Samarkand, which is of course in Middle Asia right now, and Medina and Mecca, which is now in Saudi Arabia. So look at the structure, it becomes rather obvious that to the Ming Dynasty, Tibet was really a rather irrelevant and remote place that they had very little interest in. And just because they have given some titles to these people doesn't mean that they perceive Tibet as part of the Ming Empire. Now, what you might then say is, wait a minute, Ming history was written by the Qing Dynasty people. So could it be that the victors, when they were writing history, they were trying to belittle the predecessors? In other words, the Qing Dynasty who conquered Ming Empire, they were just belittling them and not giving them proper credit of the sovereignty or the dominance over Tibet. So let's see what the Ming government said about Ming Empire. So this is another tradition. And there is, besides having what you call official history, China also has this history of doing what's called unification record. And it started earlier, but the oldest complete version dates back to Tang Dynasty. It's called Yuan Qin Shi. It's like in 700 AD. Then after that, you have, of course, the Song Dynasty and Yuan Dynasty and so forth. They all compile the old unification record. And it's just, again, a detailed catalog of all the territories, all the lands, and whatever within the country. And so, within each dynasty, these unification records, they are compiled several times because over a span of 200 plus years of each dynasty, your boundaries change, right? So if you go to Baidu, you go to Baidu, which is Chinese Wikipedia, you can see all this background information, you can see how authoritative it is. Again, it's just well accepted as something that you don't argue about, doesn't argue about. And so anyway, if you look at the structure, that book has 90 volumes. The first 88 volumes are for things that are relevant to China, which is basically internal China. And again, you have all the provinces, stuff like that. And again, it's the same thing when it comes to Yunnan province. They are not shy about stating the fact, what they perceive as fact, and that Burma, Laos, and northern Thailand are part of China. And then, of course, the last two scrolls, they then talk about things that are really of very little relevance to China. So you can see that, in fact, the title of these last two scrolls, the title explicitly is called YD, Foreign Foreigners. And you can't be more foreign than a foreign foreigner. So it's like a double adjective. So foreign foreigners, first one is Korea, Manchuria, Japan, Okinawa, and then this is Tibet. So Tibet is labeled explicitly as a foreign alien, group with others. And then, of course, the next one, there are more foreign aliens, and included in the list of foreigners would be, among others, Java, which is Indonesia, and these two places, of course, Saudi Arabia. Which would mean that it's very obvious that the Ming government never considered Tibet as part of China. And this, of course, is just an image of the catalog itself. The whole book, consists of 5,600 pages. You can download it for free, the whole 5,600 pages, from websites that are operated by the PLC government. And then you can just give you an example. And this is Yunnan. This is volume number 1. This is volume 86. Volume is Yunnan, and then Yunnan over here. As you can see, you have Burma, Myanmar, and then Laos, and then northern Thailand. And then after that, this is your foreigners. Okay, foreign aliens is 89, then you have Korea, then you have Manchuria, you have Japan, and then right here. This is Japan. And then of course, this is the last volume, and you have Vietnam, and then you have Java, you have Malacca, you have a whole bunch of other countries that currently in the South Seas or whatever. And then this is supposed to be Mecca, that's Medina. And the book, of course, contains also a preface that's written by the emperor. And the emperor, of course, starts bragging about how great his empire is. Okay, so I have the translation of that. And that's what it says over here. Since ancient times, emperors ruling the world prospered by unifying the world sea. World sea over here is in Chinese, okay, we call anything that's on the heavens, but usually it's limited to those parts of the heaven that are relevant to the Chinese. Okay, those that are not relevant, we are not considered that as part under the heaven. But anyway, we the Imperial Ming family, how great we are, and we unify all Chinese and aliens. Okay, and our territory is truly vast, blah blah blah, and so forth. And then, okay, it says over here, eastward it reaches the Ada of Liao, westward it reaches the sand dunes, and the sand dunes is well recognized in China, okay, in Chinese language, to mean this. Now this is the current PRC map. Okay, this is the PRC map, and sand dunes, the border of Gansu and Xinjiang. So this is what this emperor, when he's bragging, even when he's bragging, he's saying that that's where we are. Okay, about this point, right? And then, of course, it says that, you see, lands in all directions, without exceptions, come to a call to pay respect. In other words, the entire world come to pay us respect. Okay? So, however, seriously, as for governing within our own national boundaries, even though the whole world, is sort of, our subjects or whatever, okay? But seriously, okay, we have the capital cities, and then we have 13 points. So again, they're all explicitly stated, that is it. The others, okay, of course, they come, the aliens from all directions, they take titles from us, we can forgive some titles from them, but, seriously, they're not, they're not part of those that we live on national. So, anyway, this is a map that you have in front of you. So this Ming unification record also, after the table of content, after the preface, it is a map over here. And this is the map of the unification of Great Ming. Okay? We have unified China, and what does China mean? And you can see that this is the capital, this is Shandong, this is Shanxi province, this is Nanjing province. All these Chinese places, what they have is that they are framed, the words are framed, the capitals are framed, and there is black background with white letters. Okay? You see, this is Manchuria, this is Korea, this is Japan, and the difference is that, the contrast is that Japan, as opposed to Shandong, is that you can see that this is black background, white lettering. Over here is the other way around. It's the other way around. It's white background, black lettering, no phrase. Okay? So you see this is Xinjiang, this is Western region. Western region is a standard term used to represent the whole area west of China that goes all the way to the Roman Empire. Okay? Because the term was started during the Han Dynasty, where the Roman Empire set envoys to China. So the whole planet, from here all the way to blah 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 to that. Okay, that's Western region. And this is Tibet. Okay, and you can see the formula is exactly the same as Japan and Western region, and then it's black lettering, background on red. Okay? It's about as clear as black and white as to whether the Ming Empire considered Tibet as part of China. So anyway, let me review very briefly the significance of this Ming unification record. Okay, it's a book that follows centuries-old tradition. It is commissioned by the Ming Emperor. It's compiled by a set of scholars. The Emperor personally approves it. And then not only Tibet is excluded from the China section, it was labeled as a foreign entity in the tables of content, and then on the top of that, in the map, is shown in black and white that it's not part of China. Okay? So, to further confirm it, what you can do, I purposely picked this map, and that is not from the Chinese website, it is from the German. This is the Bavarian National Library East Asian Digital Collection. Okay? And what I want to emphasize over here is that the difference, okay, between looking at these records and looking at all the other kinds of proofs or whatever, when people argue is that most things can be fabricated. I joke to my friends, I say, I always wear these name brand shirts. Mine is a name brand shirt. I bought all of them from Shenzhen, China for $6 a piece, okay? You can go to Shenzhen and buy a Rolex watch for about, what, $50 or $100. You can fake anything, okay? But this thing you can't fake. The reason is that you have multiple copies of these records, okay? And many of them are kept in libraries in the United States, in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and in Germany, okay? So, anyway, another thing I want to mention is that the version that you have is 1461, okay? Remember I said that these records are revised several times over each dynasty because territories change. So this one is from 1461, and then in 1600, Ming Dynasty prepared a new version, and so you have a slightly different map, but basically it confirms the same thing. This is Tibet over here. You can see over here, these Chinese areas like the capital, okay, and Honan and Nanjing, they're all framed, but then you have Tibet, but then you have western regions, you have Japan, and so the form. In other words, after 100 plus years, they repeat the same sort of position. So now we can actually go back and look at the PRC version. You look at the PRC version, and then you start wondering, when they say that there's such a high achievement in Chinese historical geography, and that the fact that Chief Adams is a serious scholar, well, then it's up to you to decide. Rather. Anyway, so this is a summary. This is the summary of what we have gone through so far. We have looked at 3 official documents. Okay, the first document, okay, is prepared during the Ming Dynasty by the Ming Emperor and the government. Okay, it's called the Great Ming Unification Record. And this one, of course, is the Ming history, which follows the tradition of what you call the correct official history in the Qing Dynasty. And then we have seen the PRC historical record. And the yellow part means that it's part inside China, and the white part means it's outside China. You can see the Ming document states very clearly that northern Thailand and Laos is inside the Ming Empire, and it says very clearly that Tibet and Mongolia, they are outside the Ming Empire. And the Qing document is consistent with that statement, and that's these things are within China, Thailand, and Laos, and then Tibet and Mongolia, they are outside China, except that they divided into 2 parts. This part is for Western regions, and this part, Japan, is for foreign countries. In fact, foreign regions, Western lands, as you can see, comes after they were ranking below foreign countries. And you can see the PRC version is just the opposite. They switch left and right. Thailand and Laos, which is considered reported as part of the Ming Empire, right now is over here because today PRC wouldn't dare to even suggest that Laos and Thailand was part of China. And then they, of course, moved Tibet from this part, okay, to this part. Okay, so I think that's the reason why I tried to tell you that Chinese historical records are not as sort of untrustworthy as you think. Okay? It's just that you have very different versions of it. Okay? And actually, if you look at the older versions, they are consistent with what they say. It's just that PRC is very inventive in sort of interpreting these old Chinese records. Any question up to this point? Okay. I don't think we have time to do this. Okay. Actually, my plan is this. Is that there are 3 groups of geographic documents in the Ming Dynasty. The first group would be this governmental, the second group would be scholastic, and the third group will be the populistic. Okay? I think we don't have time to talk about the scholastic ones. The scholastic ones, we'll just have to skip that, and we'll talk about the populistic ones. So I'm going to skip all those. Let's look at the populistic one. Okay? Because you might think that, wow, those governmental documents, nobody reads that anyway, okay? So let's look at populistic literature. So China has, of course, kept very good records of all kinds of things. And one of the things that they have done, of course, is that encyclopedias. And as far as I know, China is actually the first country with encyclopedias. They started having encyclopedias back in the Wei and Jin dynasty, which is like, 480, 580. And during the Ming Dynasty, there were lots of these encyclopedias. Again, about 20 or 30 titles that are still retained by libraries today. These are original editions, okay, or photocopies of original editions. And we'll see how these encyclopedias were at that time sort of populistic. How did they teach the people of the Ming Empire during Ming Dynasty about Chinese geography? Okay? So we'll pick one as an example. This one, and I have only looked at those encyclopedias that would have a section on Chinese geography and also a section on foreign geography. So there's a section on geography means Chinese geography, and these are the various areas. So compare, how do they treat China and then Tibet and then different provinces and so forth. Okay? To show you how populistic this thing is, and to digress for a minute from this rather boring topic, you can see that in those days, the encyclopedias, they had lots and lots of different sections, okay, in this encyclopedia, just like today's encyclopedia. They cover all kinds of things, okay? So you have one section on calligraphy, one section on paintings, okay, one section on weapons, and then one section on what you call the breeze and moon section. Moon and breeze and moon section is a euphemism in Chinese for sex and love. Okay, so there's a section for sex and love matters, okay? And you can see the contents of it. This is the sex, the wind and moon section, which is breeze and moon or whatever. And so the first part of this section would be a convenient collection of basic love letters. And the first form letter is a letter to a favorite prostitute. At that time, you don't write love letters to your girlfriend or to your wife. Okay, you write love letters to your favorite prostitute. And it's a form letter, okay, if you don't know how to write it. So it's very populistic. If you don't have much education, you don't know how to write a love letter to your favorite prostitute, look up this, copy a few sentences. Okay? And then this is page 200. Okay? This is page 200. Okay? You flip through a number of pages with all kinds of different form letters and love letters. This one is a form letter or reply letter from the younger gay partner. Homosexual activities and behavior was widely tolerated. It was accepted as human nature. So this is, you have a gay partner and you don't know how to write a love letter, a gay copy of this and that. Further down, okay, you have this thing, appended, wonderful recipe for a romantic nuptial suite. Okay, it's basically a recipe for aphrodisiac. I'm not suggesting that any of the distinguished members of this audience would be interested in these things. I'm just trying to prove to you, okay, that this is really a very populistic book, okay? It tells you all kinds of things, okay? And for this book, then we'll see how they then teach Chinese Ming history, Ming geography, and also what foreign countries. So, this is a table of some of these encyclopedias that you can go to the library and check through. And what I've shown you is this title, but there are a whole bunch of other titles. These are all different encyclopedias, okay? That is to say, the regional form exists today, and these are sort of Ming Dynasty publications. And so you can see it follows the same kind of old story. And there's the 2 capitals and the 13 provinces, 15 altogether. Region number 1 is Beijing. These are 2 capitals, and then region 3 is Shanxi, and then Shandong, and it's all included. And then again, consistently, Tibet is never mentioned. Okay? Tibet is never mentioned in the Chinese geography section. Okay? And then this is from yet another title, just to give you an example. So this is how they introduce foreign countries. Okay, how they talk about Chinese geography in a section of foreign countries. They will show you pictures. Okay, most of them are laughable, but that's beside the point. So this is Laos. This is Tibet, okay, and this is 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, and 32 is India. Okay, so they will then show you pictures of how these people dress and stuff like that. Okay, most of them, of course, are not very reliable, but you can see that. Tibet, which is never mentioned in the Chinese geography section, they are always mentioned among the foreign countries. Okay? And also you can see this. Okay? Burma, the treatment is erratic because remember, Burma was identified as one of the foreign countries, so that's the reason why it's not mentioned over here. It was mentioned as part of China, whereas Tibet is just the other way around. And the ranking, as we know just now, was that Tibet was ranked 31. See, okay, there are 32 terms used for Tibetan regions at the time. Tibet would be Tubo. Tubo will be more like what's today's TAR, whereas Xifan would be more like today's Qinghai and the western part of Sichuan and so forth. Okay, so they actually would have mentioned two separate sort of Tibetan region. One was at that time sort of under the control of Dalai Lama, and the other one was all these other separate places. They consistently rank below Japan. And of course, you know the Chinese hate Japan. I mean, the Chinese feel very insulted if we say that Japan is part of China, vice versa. You can see amusingly over here is that they have always rated Japan is closer to China over here. So over here, in this particular book, for example, Japan is ranked 20th, and then it was above this. And for this one, of course, Japan is ranked 3rd. Oh my goodness, you know, Japan is ranked 100. And if you look at the average ranking, okay, this is ranked 39, 46. Japan is ranked, of course, very highly. Tibetan areas are ranked below India. Okay? So, in other words, I think what I've been trying to do is to prove that if you were living during Ming Dynasty in the Ming Empire, there's no way you could have gotten the impression that Tibet is part of China. And today, if you read these Ming documents, again, there's no way you could have gotten the impression that Tibet is part of China. Okay? So, Vietnam is the administrative aspect because then there are, of course, other criteria such as they collect tax, the education, the schools. We have no time. But actually, I can tell that all these aspects, they all point to one thing. There's really no indication or no proof that Tibet is part of China. But let's look at an individual event. Okay? So the individual event is Emperor Wuzong's attempt to invite the living Buddha, and this is recorded in the correct history. Remember, this is the Ming history. Okay, this is the official history. So I'm just trying to do a sort of a straight translation. It is also, of course, recorded in the veritable records, which, remember what I was explaining, that is the primary source. Okay, veritable records is all the records, okay, that are kept for an emperor, and after his death, okay, the successor will then combine all the diaries, remember, the rising and living records, and then compile the veritable records. So they are recorded in many places in these primary documents. Okay, so let's see how the story goes. Remember, this is just translation. Okay, so please don't blame me for any insulting sort of attitudes. It's written by the Mandarins at that time, and of course, they don't like the Tibetans. Okay, so they're not very nice things to say about the Tibetans. Okay, let's see how it goes. But again, see, it shows you how reliable these records are. On one hand, you can see that they have this negative attitude towards the Tibetans, but on the other hand, they just tell you what happened. Okay, so. Tributes were submitted again in 1506 and again in 1515. And then at that time, the emperor was misled by his attendant, told him that a Tibetan Wusuzang, Wusuzang means Tibetan monk that could see through 3 incarnations was hailed as a living Buddha by people in the monk's country. They use the word country, okay, Tibetan country. And then, of course, the emperor wanted to meet him and ordered the eunuch Liu Yin to be the ambassador to invite the monk, and not to summon the monk, but he couldn't have summoned him because there is no power to invite the monk to the ambassador. Okay. The Prime Minister, Liang Shu, and others, all the important officials, they were telling this emperor that don't do it. And they pointed out that although the early emperors of a dynasty have sent envoys there, but it was because the Bull Sea, our relevant world has just been conquered by the early emperors, and it was done in order to guide and educate the ignorant and to control comfort of faraway places. After we have enjoyed peace, the succeeding emperors have only bestowed presents to these Tibetans because they came to seek audience with the emperor. We have never carelessly abused our diplomats by sending them to these remote, godforsaken places. Okay, we have looked at nothing to do with this Tibetan. Okay? And then also this eunuch is asking for a lot of resources. I mean, they sort of call this hardship. Please don't do that. Okay, come the emperor. Okay, don't be so dumb as to go and bring this living Buddha, whatever you call it, to China. Furthermore, this is continuation of what the Prime Minister is saying. The Prime Minister is saying this to the emperor. Furthermore, after leaving our border at Tianqianyu Fan, okay, Tianqian 6 barbarians. Okay, so the Prime Minister is saying that this is our border to Tianqianyu Fan. Again, this is a geographical term that has no dispute today. Even PRC recognizes it. Okay, that Tianqianyu Fan is here. Okay? This is Tianjin Yufan. This is Sichuan province. Okay, this is TAR. Okay, so this is the border. Okay, this is the westernmost border. Tianjin Yufan is over here. Okay, so that's what the Prime Minister tells the emperor. After you leave our border at around here, then you're wilderness. Okay, then you're wilderness. There's still several tens of thousands of miles more, requiring several years. But even the Prime Minister had no idea how far these places are. Just so remote. Okay, and then sorry, and then. Along the way, there's absolutely no station, okay? How will the entourage be provisioned? If raiders were encountered, how will the entourage be defended? I mean, it's just a place that the Chinese would never want to go to. The whole idea is told at example. And then they basically told the emperor, we, your subordinates, regret that we will not perform the associated documentation work for your majesty. In other words, we boycott you, okay? You want to do something like that, you do it yourself. The emperor says, fine. You don't want to do it for me? Okay, I'll do it myself. Okay, so they send it unit there. Nevertheless. Okay. So they started using all kinds of resources to prepare gifts for this living Buddha. Okay? Strings of gold, blah blah blah, and so forth. So they completely depleted the gold holdings of the entire imperial palace. Convert all the gold, make it into utensils, okay, for gifts to be brought to Tibet. Tens of thousands of tons of silver was made, and then there were thousands units, 100,000 units of tea. This is straight translation from the Ming history record. Okay? And then Liu Yin was given 10 years for a return trip. Okay? In other words, the emperor also had no idea where on earth this place is. Okay? 10 years. If those of you who have read the Chinese novel of Journey to the West, okay, The Monkey King, you know, it's something like that. It's like this monk, okay, went to the Western Heaven, okay, and God will spend how many years? So it's the same thing as like, yeah, maybe 10 years. So this Liu Yin, okay, brought all these goods and blah 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 and so forth, okay, and caused a lot of disturbances and a lot of hardship to places, you know, on the way. And then eventually, after reaching Chengdu, okay, they wanted a lot of supplies. Okay. They also then wanted the local government, the Sichuan government, to then provide another trip. Well, they already spent a lot of money in Beijing, okay, in the palace, preparing all these gifts, right? Around this is the imperial sort of envoy, so it's a very prestigious person. So he wanted the local government to provide 200,000 tons of silver. And this is like more than the entire annual budget of this provincial government, okay? And they wanted it to be the gift of this fund. So local government fought vigorously, and finally, you know, they released 170,000 tons. Okay? And so the workers started laboring night and day to make all these things for preparing to go to Tibet. And then after more than a year of preparation, this eunuch resumed the journey, accompanied by 10 military officers and 1,000 soldiers. This is the only time during Ming Dynasty when the Chinese Empire sent troops to Tibet. But it's not to make war, it's to try to invite this monk to come to China, and it's with 1,000 soldiers. 2 months later, they arrived in the Meng's region, which is sort of, as I said, west of Lhasa, about 70 miles west of Lhasa. The so-called living Buddha was worried that the Chinese man harmed and hit himself. The same thing, I mean, this Chinese monk was saying, who the heck are these people? I mean, they really look down, coming all the way with all this gold and trying to invite me. Is that for real? I mean, so they didn't believe it, okay? So he hit himself. This angered the Chinese military and planned to use force. So this again, I don't remind, a straight translation from Chinese historical records. Okay? The barbarians, I'm just translating the original words, okay? Barbarians meaning attacked. The barbarians attacked them at night, seizing all the treasures and weapons. 2 officers and several hundred soldiers died, and an additional half of that number were women. And then the eunuch escaped using a fast horse, was only able to save himself and nothing else. After reaching Chengdu in Sichuan province, he issued a gag order to his subordinates and used fast horses to submit as a report an empty envelope to the court. When the report reached the court, the emperor, who sent the eunuch, died, and the successor ordered the eunuch to return and be punished by wrongdoing. The anticlimax, story 8. The anticlimax is actually the climax of my presentation, because if you think about it, the eunuch didn't do anything wrong, right? It was the monk that attacked them and they killed these monks. Why don't you punish the monk? And if you don't punish the monk, at least condemn the monk by there's no mention of anything because the emperor basically has no control over this living Buddha in Tibet. Okay, so this whole account shows that again, the Tibet was not only a foreign country, but it was a very, very foreign country because at that time, look at Ming history, there were detailed records of how they had punished governments in Vietnam, even in Java. Okay, they sent ships to punish rulers as far away as Java for having defied the orders of the emperor. But when you come to something like that, I mean, the emperor spent so much money trying to invite this guy, the soldiers were killed, and then the end. So, that's the end of the Ming Dynasty. I'm going to move on to Qing Dynasty. But before I do that, any questions? No question?
I have a question from the previous section.
What?
I asked one question from the previous section.
Okay.
You have present comparing with the three documents, the PRC, Ming Dynasty, and Qing Dynasty. And in the PRC, the Tibet is included, and the other two were not excluded. So my question is, when the PRC history has begun?
Well, no. Okay. Please let me modify the question. Okay. When it comes to Ming Dynasty, what I am trying to show is that the Ming Empire never claimed that Tibet was part of the Ming Empire. The Qing Empire never claimed that Tibet was part of the Ming Empire. Only during the PRC period was the Chinese PRC government willing to claim that Tibet was part of the Ming Empire. Okay? Now, I think the question is a little bit unclear because then when we talk about, then how about the Qing Empire? Was Tibet part of the Qing Empire? What did the Qing Empire say about Tibet being part of the Qing Empire? What did the Republic of China say about Tibet being part of the Qing Empire? And what did the PRC say about Tibet being part of the Qing Empire? Right? And in that respect, that's what I'm going to come at right now. And that is, in the Ming Empire, both Ming and Qing say Tibet was never part of this, but PRC said, no. Tibet was part of Ming Empire. In Qing Empire, what happens? And that's actually what I'm going to talk about. What I'm going to show actually is that the Qing Empire started claiming that Tibet was part of China in 1792. It was after Fukaman, sent the army into Tibet and warred with Nepal.
So my question is, in Ming Dynasty, Ming Empire, the Chinese Ming Empire's dynasty says that the Tibet is not part of China, and the Qing Dynasty again says Tibet is not part of China.
Of Ming.
But PRC.
And even the Republic of China didn't dare to say that because as you can see, a document shows that it's just so ridiculously.
So my question is, PRC history is claiming Tibet is part of China on what basis?
Okay. Now, you see, this is. Let me try to go back to this. This is. You see, no source given by the Met Office. China's PRC's position is that this is what the Chinese government says, I'm the authority, this is it, okay? And you're right, there is no source given. Usually you would cite, in Chinese documentation, you would cite that this is according to what document in the Ming Dynasty. They don't cite that. Because there's no proof. Okay, so actually there's more to it than that. I'll actually say a little bit more about this. Is that it's very strange. If you look at this, this is an 8-volume atlas of all these maps of different provinces and different dynasties. They didn't cite the authoritative source of this because there's no authoritative source. But later on, they do cite some sources, and as when these sources support the position, they cite them. But this one, there's a supported position, so it's not cited. So we just pretend that it's not worth citing. So to answer your question, no proof. Any other question about the Ming Dynasty thing before we move on to Dynasty?
I mean, I think the issue predates the Ming Dynasty with the Yuan Dynasty and the Mongols. That's where the whole problem was.
Right. And I only have time to talk about Ming and Qing. We don't have time to talk about the Yuan and the ROC. Actually, the Yuan Dynasty is the same nature. If you look at the Yuan Dynasty documents, again, it's very clear that Tibet was not part of it. Now, it's different. You have to remember that these Mongols, okay, their armies went all the way bordering to Hungary and Austria, okay, and they definitely conquered Russia. And the tributes they exacted from Russia is very different from these old suckers sort of arrangement. Remember, old suckers arrangement is that you give me $1, I'll give you $10, and I'm going to call you my tributary nation. Russians were forced to give real money, to give huge amount of money to the Yuan, Chinese, well, whatever we call it, Mongols after, okay? So, and then the same with Iran and Iraq and stuff like that, okay? So the question is that, what constitutes part of the Yuan Empire? You're not going to count Iraq and Iran and Austria, otherwise, well, China would be very big today, right? So, but that's a definition of Yuan Empire. And again, we come back to the correct history, because the correct history is a tradition of telling you what we consider as Tianxia, under the heaven of China. So one of the things is to go to the Yuan government's documentation on the Chinese Yuan Empire's territories. And again, you can see very clearly that Tibet was never listed. But I don't have time to show you that, as I said. I only have time to talk about 2 dynasties. Okay, buy my book 5 years from now. You have all the maps of the Yuan dynasty publications that show very clearly that Tibet was never considered. Okay, I mean, just like you never claimed that Iraq was part of the Yuan Empire. It was part of the Mongols Empire. Okay, the 4 empires, right? It's divided up. That's not true.
So I have one question. I have found one coin, this Tibetan coin. It was in 1890 and above. And in that coin, there are 2 different ways. In one hat and tail. One is written in Chinese,
Yeah.
and this. Another in back side, then it was written Shentong, time of Shentong. And in this Tibetan money, Shentong Pögi Ringgol. It was mentioned.
Shandong province?
Yes. No, the Shentong, during the time of Shentong. I have seen one.
Shentong.
Yeah, Shentong.
Okay.
So in this coin, they mention
Yeah.
Shentong Pögi. Pögi means Tibetan coin.
Yeah.
So I got confused because at that time, that Shentong, that area is under
Shentong, you mean the Emperor Shentong?
Yeah.
Yeah, the last emperor of Qing, the last emperor of the Qing dynasty.
Yeah. So what it means, so that coin is used in that area between Tibet and China. You have seen it at
Well, I actually, in my book, I have a separate chapter of this talking about coinage in Tibet. Now, what you said is actually very strange, by the way. I find it hard to believe. Because even the Chinese Empire, the Qing Empire, they admitted, okay, that they stopped minting Chinese coins in Tibet, okay, less than 40 years after Fukangan's conquest, we call it, in 1792, okay? And they started minting Chinese coins in Tibet, and it was minted for a few decades after they stopped. So I'm very surprised to hear that you have coins minted by supposedly the Chinese government for Tibet in the Shentong era. But first of all, it's like that, okay? First of all, I am only interested in records. I'm not interested in a real object. The simple reason is that, sorry to say this, your coin might be just as genuine as my name brand shirt. Okay?
But
I don't know how those coins came about.
Yeah, that is also in the world coin,
Yeah.
There's a book.
Yeah.
You can also find out these coins. So there are 2
Yeah.
types of coins.
Yeah.
one is made by silver and one is made by
Yeah. Yeah.
copper.
Yeah.
So they are the same like today, 100 cent,
Yeah.
1 cent like America.
Yeah.
So they are, you can find this from the
Yeah.
world,
Yeah.
money.
Yeah.
The book is there,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
you can find it.
Yeah. Yeah, we need to talk a lot more about it because again, you see, my approach is very different. My approach is that I don't believe in my name brand shirt because anyone can fabricate it. Okay, I only believe in those records because these records, as you can see, they are stored in different countries, different libraries, and nobody can fit. So I can't say anything. I plead ignorance. Okay, but according to the Chinese records, they stopped minting. The Chinese Empire stopped minting coins for the Tibetans 40 years after, about 40 years. After Fukushima. Okay? Then, of course, there's another question: is that those coins were minted, but were they in wide circulation? Nobody knows. Okay. In fact, it's well known. It's well known that all those years, okay, the Tibetans were using the Buddhist coins. And then later on, you can see the treaties. All these treaties, okay, between Tibet and Nepal and whatever, they're talking about paying in the Nepalis and the British, they were all in rupees. The Chinese currency is never used in those treaties. Okay, they always specify rupees. So I have to look at your coin and then we have to do more research about the Shinto. So I'm sorry I can't answer your question. But so you can talk about even postal stamps, postage and stuff like that. How was the Chinese postal system imposed on the Tibetans? Okay, and how does it reflect on the sovereignty? Okay, I have another chapter on that. What's that?
Actually, move on to the next part since we're time.
Oh, okay. How much time do we have?
We have a little bit more time.
How much?
I think we have the room till about 9:30, so I'm gonna.
Okay, half an hour. Okay. Now, when we are talking about Qing Dynasty, it's a little bit complicated. Well, actually, it's considerably more complicated. For the simple reason that in Ming Dynasty, as you can see, the Ming government never even claimed that Tibet was part of it. Okay, so it was very clear cut. Now, Qing is different because the Qing government at one point, actually in 1792, they started claiming that Tibet was part of China. So you need to then say, well, is the claim justifiable? So then we need to then talk about the criteria. What makes a place as being part of an empire? Okay, what are the criteria? So give an example, like in my case. Suppose I want to prove that I'm an American citizen, okay? What's the best proof? Okay, I mean, if I'm confident and if I'm really an American citizen, I have a very simple proof. I take out my current American passport, and that's it, right? What happens in all Americans who travel to foreign countries, they don't have a passport. Well, you can show the birth certificate. The birth certificate is a very strong proof, but it's not conclusive because you could have renounced the citizenship. Okay? You were born an American citizen, but you're no more. Okay? No, it's not like a valid current passport. Also, in many countries, citizenship is not a birthright. If you're born in Israel, doesn't mean that you become a citizen of Israel, right? So the birth certificate would not be sort of as conclusive. Now, suppose if I say, look, I don't have a birth certificate, I don't have a citizenship certificate, I don't have a passport. I'll show you this photograph that I took with President Trump, okay? President, right? That proves I'm an American citizen. Not only doesn't count, in fact, I think it reflects that I'm trying to understand because you know that, okay, it doesn't count, right? So, same thing with the country. And two countries, or rather two regions, okay? Tibet and China. If you were Chinese or you were Tibetan, I'm going to argue for either side, doesn't matter, okay? What do you think of the criteria is most important? Okay, and in fact, this gentleman raised one, and that is currency, right? But again, it could be relevant, it may not be, because if you look at today, in the Western European countries, they all use the same currency, but they're basically different countries, right? So it is certainly a reflection of one being part of the other. If Tibet is actually universally using Chinese coin, but that is factually not true, by the way. Right? And that's not a really conclusive thing. But what are the other criteria you want to look at? Do you have a suggestion? To try to prove or disprove that Tibet was or was not part of the empire. Yes, sir?
Tax records?
Very good. Tax records. Why do you want to conquer a place? to get money, right? Otherwise, why bother even to conquer places? But again, the exception. Hong Kong today, by the way, China doesn't collect taxes in Hong Kong. Okay? So every criterion has exceptions. So in other words, you have to look at all of those. Okay? You look at it. Okay. When you say tax records, is something that's closely related? Any other suggestion? We have tax records. We have coinage, and what else? Remember we talked about just now in the Ming Dynasty, geographical records, right? Okay, whether the government has actually claimed that place. Okay. Now, this is only a one-way street, by the way. If you prove that China has never claimed Tibet to be part of the empire, then of course it's, I think, conclusive proof that it is not, right? But on the other hand, if you can show a map where China claims a certain place, that doesn't prove that China owns a place. Like, you know, I mean, you have to claim that you owe me $1 million. Just because I make a claim doesn't prove that you actually owe me $1 million. Okay? So, but anyway, anything else? Particularly if you think about tax. How do they collect tax? You need a roll of tax data, right? But
Census.
that's right, it's census, okay? Census drives everything. Census drives the citizenship records, nationality, subjects, okay, whether you're subjects, and then collect taxes. Okay, so actually, and if you, of course, you know about Christianity, the first story that we learned in school about Jesus is that, you know, the parents had to go to a place, okay, ordered by the Roman emperor, okay, to report, and because they were counting, you know, how many taxpayers in each region. Okay, so there are all these firsts. Anyway, so we don't have time to look at all these aspects, but you can think of all this, okay? Geographic documents, okay? Whether China has the power to appoint representatives, and again, you see, this kind of a thing might be relevant in one country and might not be relevant to the other. For example, you're talking about over here the power of the United States to appoint, you know, ruler in the state of Iowa, for example, and you can see that actually, you know, even though Iowa is obviously part of the United States, but the United States, Washington President Donald Trump has no power in appointing a governor in Iowa or New York with this, okay? But in other places, yes, okay? So different criteria has different level of importance in different systems. We have looked at all of those, and obviously I don't have time to look at all of those. This one, of course, is the collect taxes, okay? Anyway, then there are a whole bunch of them, another criteria, okay? But I'm going to concentrate really on this, okay? Census, and then nationality and citizenship and subjects, okay? Was China able to get census records, census data? Were Tibetans considered as Chinese nationals or Chinese subjects? Okay? So that's the only thing that we'll get to talk about today. For example, control over pigtails, okay, is irrelevant in most countries, but it was very relevant in China, by the way, okay, because the Manchurians actually threatened the Chinese. If you don't have the pigtails, your head will be chopped off. I don't know whether you realize that, okay? In Chinese, we call it liu fa bu liu tou, okay? But then the Tibetans were never forced to do that, okay? So, okay, but there are sort of many factors altogether, okay? So anyway, so we are now down to Qing Dynasty, so we'll only talk about two things. One is the one that we used early in the Ming Dynasty. We're talking about classification of Chinese versus foreign regions in geographic documents, and then we'll talk about census and residency registry. Okay? So anyway, we have very little time left, so I'm going to skip most of it. But you see, as I've said, there are many different sets of these imperially commissioned documents that are prepared according to the Chinese historical tradition over the centuries. Okay? And the other thing, the other kind of this is this thing. It's what you call the comprehensive references. Okay? And they have the Ming Dynasty, the Yuan Dynasty, they have even Tang Dynasty, they have these what we call comprehensive records. Again, they have the entire country, all the systems and all the rules and whatever. And then of course Qing Dynasty, they have the same thing, it's called the Great Qing Comprehensive References. And again, that was compiled several times over the 267 years of Qing Dynasty rule. And this is the Yongzheng Emperor era, the Yongzheng Emperor, okay? The comprehensive references compiled with the Yongzheng Emperors, okay? So they show a map of China, okay? And this is the title of the map. It's called Zhi Fang Zhong Tu, which literally means, you know, the realm of our entire empire. So this is the realm of the entire empire. Now this is a bit small, so enlarge it, but please remember this part, okay? Just remember this part. So I'm going to enlarge it, and this is it. And so what you see over here is that this map shows Mongolia, okay? It shows Korea, it shows Okinawa, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, but this is an important landmark, okay? This is in today's Qinghai province, and this position is blank. They don't even bother to name this place with labels. Okay? Now you're going to say, wait a minute, am I blocking anything? So I'm going to go, so I didn't block anything, okay? This is blank, okay? This is blank, okay? I'm just putting this with the signal to show that this is my position is blank. So Vietnam is shown, okay? So this is 1727, okay? The Qing Empire, the Qing dynasty started in China in 1604. So, 80 years into Qing Empire's rule, there was still just totally non-Tibet. Okay, it doesn't even warrant a label. Okay? If a label doesn't mean a part of China, because you can see they label Okinawa, they label Korea, they even label Vietnam. Okay, but it doesn't mean the part of China. This is very clear. It's not even label. So now to answer the question that was raised by this gentleman is that you look at the map of this Great Qing, again, these are imperially commissioned documents. This is called Great Qing Comprehensive Reference, okay? And this map was repeated also in the Great Qing Unification Record map. We have already seen in this map, this is the Great Ming Unification Record, okay? The Qing dynasty, of course, they compile the same thing again, compiled several different editions, okay? But by the time they get to the Jia Qing Emperor, which by that time is 1812, okay, then it is the band is included. So in this map, the band is shown. Okay? So that really to answer your question is that it's after 1792, except of course that year they didn't revise this document, so the nearest is 1792 is this edition. Okay. So, but of course, as I say, simply because you draw a map that shows that somebody else's land belongs to you doesn't prove anything. But at least answer the question is that whether Tibet became part of China was never an issue until about 1792, when the Qing government started making it. Okay? Now, we don't have time to really go through much of that, but what I want to stress is that even in that book, okay, they are not clear. Because in a map like this, they show that Tibet is part of China. They show that this is the Kazakhstan border, this is the Hindustan border, this is the Nepal border, again, which presumably would imply that it's outside China. But you look at the structure of the book, remember again, consists of thousands of pages. If you look at the way they are, I can't afford to talk about this tonight because it's just too much time. But actually, what I'll go through with this is that, if you look at the structure of this, is that all these real Chinese areas, okay, they were labeled as governing departments. Okay, so this is like Jiangsu, Anhui, these are all the provinces, and they're all labeled as governing departments. Okay? And the last one they were labeled as governing department was Xinjiang. And Xinjiang at that time, you can see that this claim over here, right here, contradicts what we saw over here. Because what we saw over here is Tibet is inside of China, and then you have Kazakhstan and Hindustan, which is outside China. Okay? But when you look at the content, the structure is the other way around. Because what they have over here within the Xinjiang governing department are the list of these names, and these places, okay, are in today's Pakistan, Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. Okay? So actually, what this book does is that in the content, they explicitly claim that that is part of China that was governed by China. So, okay, because it's governed by China. And then they have Tibet, which is in the gray. This is the gray area, as you can see. This is the gray area. Because after that, you have the tributary countries. And again, you can see the bragging of this Qing emperor or the Qing government. The tributary countries are, of course, Korea, and then over here you have England. England being classified as tributary. Of course, if you know about today's PRC version, is that England was the biggest bully and the biggest enemy of China, right? The Opium War and so forth. But actually, it is the other way around. They actually claim that England is a tributary country, and then of course over here you have other countries, and then of course that's France. I'm sorry? These are, as I say, what you call imperially commissioned documents. And this is the Great Qing Unification Record. Remember, this thing comes from the Great Ming Unification Record. Okay, we have these records back to about the 6th century. The Tang Dynasty, every central government would compile these things, okay, as a comprehensive record of all the territories, okay? So this one is the Great Qing Unification Record. It's a continuation of the thousand-year tradition of the central government making a complete catalog of all the regions of the realm.
I was just wondering that how this map and this data are contributed to each other.
Well, that's interesting, okay? And it's actually very, I don't have time to explain it, but it's not contradicting actually because it's like that. The important things are very, very consistent in China, okay? The non-important things, when you start bragging, you can brag anything you like. See, actually, you look at this part, this is the important part. This is real China. You look at all this history, okay? Anything that concerns these things, okay, it involves real money. They're talking about tax collection, they're talking about, you know, the people who will be eligible for official duties or whatever, they're very clear. And then below this, like, my goodness, places like Kazakhstan, like Tibet, or like England, or like France, pardon me my language, it's a bunch of BS. Okay? You are just trying to please the emperor. You're trying to tell the emperor, look, we have all these territories, and so it is contradictory. In fact, it's so contradictory as that, in fact, you look at that, for example, it would be difficult to look back. Do you remember earlier on, we were talking about Ming encyclopedias? They have two terms for the Tibetans. One is Tubo, okay, and one is Xifan, okay? And theoretically, Xifan means the Tibetans in today's Qinghai and Western Sichuan, and Tubo would mean what's today like Lhasa and Tibet. Even that they mix up, because basically they could care less. I mean, they don't care less. They could care less who these people are, because they know that they're not paying taxes. Okay, they just want to include them as part of these people who come and pay respect to the emperor, just a big tribute to them. So that is explanation. Yes, it is a contradiction. There are lots of contradictions. It's only in the part when they start writing. Okay, like, of course, you see that this is ridiculous, obviously, you know, by calling England and France as tributary countries. Actually, I don't have time to do it. They even have a complete listing of all the European countries with tributaries, okay? And they translate the name of Portugal in two Chinese versions, and you count Portugal twice as two separate tributary countries, okay? But that's not very important, because we know that, you know, only the PRC would bring this thing up and say, hey, look, you know, of course they won't want to bring up England and France and Portugal, okay? They keep bringing up the fact. And most people don't realize, you look at these records, is that you look at these tributary countries, okay, not only Tibet is a tributary country, but so is France and England. So anyway, I don't have time to go through this in detail, so let me just skip all this. And so, okay. This is a summary of the 10 major works, okay? Those marked with the 2, superscript 2, those are what you call imperially commissioned documents. We have actually looked at that. The Great Qing Unification Record, okay? And no, we have looked at that. Jia Qing, we have looked at this one, okay? We have just looked at this one. Great Qing Unification Record, Jia Qing era. We have looked at the map of the Yongzheng era. Remember Yongzheng era, the map, okay? The Tibet era was even labeled. They even could care less about labeling it. By this time, of course, the map shows that Tibet was part of China, but the content shows something different. But if you look at all these major publications starting from the beginning of the dynasty, 1644, to the end of the dynasty, it's 1911, being the end. And of course, the correct official history was then compiled, remember, after the fall of the Qing dynasty. You can see, if you read the book, what kind of impression you get. You see that most of the books actually tell very clearly that Tibet was part of China. Okay? And those books that claim that Tibet was part of China, remember they started claiming in 1792, you see that they actually internally contradicting. It's basically because they don't know how to deal with Tibet, which they know is a place that they have no control over, but they want to claim it, so you can see the internal contradiction. And I'll see actually some of that if you have time to. How much time do you have?
We have a few more. Keep going. I'll let you know.
Okay. So, but anyway, we will see what these contradictions mean. When do you want me to stop?
I'll let you know.
Okay. So anyway, okay, you have heard this part, right? Maybe I should skip this part. You want me to skip this part and go on to something else? Because some of you have heard this part. I talk about the census, the rest of you see.
I think for many people in the audience, the Qing part is actually the part that is the hardest to understand because it's more complex.
Okay, so you want me to go through this?
Yeah,
Okay.
there's time for that.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so let's talk about the census. Again, the Chinese, they keep a first, just like everything else. Very good records since thousands of years ago. And when it comes to population records, it's the same thing. So over here you have again a multitude of these what you call imperially commissioned governmental documents. Okay, there's a lot of this. And one of those would be yet another one that's called Imperially Approved Comprehensive Research of Imperial Dynasties Records. Okay, 世修清定王朝。And then they would then give you the population figures of the early Qing, okay, in each of this era, okay. Kangxi year 18, there will be a full set. Okay, they don't do census every year, okay, but every 5-6 years they do it, and then they will record it, okay. And then Yongzheng, okay, and Chengdu will be year 14, year 22, blah, 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 and so forth. So they're all given, and then the formula will be something like that. It just tells you, okay, in this particular year, 1783, the total population of all provinces is so much, and then each province or whatever, okay, and that would be in scrolls number 19 to 20. Okay, in scroll number 19, they'll tell you these what you call internal provinces, and of course, you got to mention any of this. Okay, and then Mongolia and part of Manchuria, they are then handled in scroll 20. Again, they're specifically mentioned, and neither scroll 19 or 20 contains the word of Tibet. Okay, so there's never any mention about Tibet census record. This is the numbers for the other part of Qing Dynasty. As for the entire Qing Dynasty, particularly the part after Qianlong, okay, then you go to another set of imperially commissioned records, which is, of course, I already talked about that just now with regards to the maps. There's a great Qing comprehensive reference, and this kind of comprehensive references, as I say, it dates back all the way back to even the Tang Dynasty and earlier. Okay, there was this tradition of keeping this. And so again, they keep very, very detailed records. And if you look at, for example, the scroll number 17, and that's about Ministry of the Interior, okay? And there is population figures and tax figures. And again, they will say that, well, the duties of the minister is to manage the residency registry of the world C being the Chinese world, okay? The entire Chinese Empire. And then they also then separately specify the population registries of the external fund. Mongolia managed by the fund office. Like, I will look at that a little bit more in detail. But you see, the PRC government claims that Tibet was like Mongolia, it was managed by the fund office. Okay, the fund here. Okay, so you can see over here, in these records, they will deal with the internal provinces in one scroll. They will deal with Manchuria and Mongolia separately. Never mentioned. In other words, the Li Fan Mian, okay, the fan office managed Mongolia, but not never mentioning that. Now, and then if you go into this comprehensive record, okay, they will then further break down the population figures into two parts. Okay, and so in the Qing Dynasty, there are really two kinds of Chinese subjects. Okay? And they tell you what they are. They say that we have internal people, Fu actually basically means the kind of balance, okay, Fu, okay, internal core. So we have internal people, and they're counted by individual persons, and then they call the registries of previous provinces, and then they start listing, okay, the population of each province, blah, 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 and so forth, okay? So there will be thousands of words that just, of course, deleted most of it. And then there was this fringe people. Border people. And border people are counted by households. They tell you, okay, in census keeping, we don't count them, we just count the households, okay? And then these are the minorities, Fan, Hui, okay, and then blah, 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 and so forth. And then, they then also specifically mention the areas that are being considered. Tibet, 39 tribes. Again, this is a geographic term that is now universally recognized even by the PRC, that Tibet 39 Tibet 39 tribe refers to this group of people who was at that time living in the borderland between Tibet and today's Sichuan. Okay? In fact, you see the figure is too small for Tibet. Okay, so 1,080 and 9 So you can see, even in today's Russia, okay, this was a place that belonged to the Qing Empire earlier, but then eventually then was ceded to Russia. They account for it, okay, in a very small number, 768 in today's Siberia. So all these places accounted for, Tibet is never mentioned. Okay? In other words, it's not one of those internal people. Tibetans were neither one of those internal people nor one of those borders. And this is an example of what you have. Right? So that's how the Chinese population records are kept. If you look at the different, ignore this for the time being. Okay, just look at these are the imperially commissioned ones, and this of course is official history. And you can see different years, the population figures are shown explicitly. Okay, and of course they are all shown in the geography section because, as you mentioned, this is traditionally the Chinese official history. They will have the population records and the tax records all shown in the geography section. This is one method. This is China history. Okay? And you can see, naturally, the figures change from year to year. Okay, from 1812 to 1920. You can see that for this border people, and this of course is this place is inside Siberia, which was later ceded to Russia. You can see that they actually tell you that at this time it was 595 households. It was increased to that. And then later on, the book specifically tells you that we don't keep data anymore because there's no more part of China. Okay? Now, you can see that the Tibet 39 tribes, which I say is not Tibet, is that the group of people that live there. Very interesting. The numbers don't change. Okay? Population figures change, right? They don't change because basically, they actually got it from this book. This book is recognized as the earliest book written by Chinese on Tibet. Is also universally recognized as a book that we don't know who the author is or was, and we don't know the year of publication. Okay? It's some book, okay, that apparently has some records and we are using it. In other words, China has detailed records even over Siberia or whatever, but when it comes to even the 39 tribes, which is really, just, fringe, they actually can only get it from here and then use the same figures through the years. Okay? Now, you can see now how honest Zhao Xun, remember Zhao Xun is the brother of the Butcher of Tibet, okay? Zhao Feng, okay? He was the chief editor of Qing History, okay, the official history of China. When he started compiling this with his subordinates, okay, he had to follow tradition. Tradition is that population figures of your own territory, you put it in geography. Geography 8, geography 2, geography 3, okay, and so forth. Okay? Now, this is the problem. Okay? They know that, this was really not part of China, even though it was really labeled as border people, the border people, these are real border people. Okay? You can see that they actually conduct that. Okay? Over here they did it. So, politically, he was supposed to do, because by that time it was the Republic of China. Okay? There was so much pressure, okay, to incorporate Tibet as part of China. So, but he knew that he didn't want to allow. Okay? To put it in geography would be wrong, but not to account for some population figure. And also you have to remember, he was the governor of Sichuan. His brother was the conqueror of Tibet. He should know where the population figure is, right? And the best population figure that he could come up with, knowing where all the records lie, was to come up with a figure that was in a book, hundreds of years ago, which they don't know the authorship or whatever. And then they reported it, okay, in Military 5, which is the Modern 134. In other words, he purposely sort of deviated from the tradition in treating it as a hint that, hey, wait a minute, this is something different. I don't want to be explicit about it, okay? It's a big difference between the historians of the olden days and the historians of today's PRC, okay? Because people are brought up with different values, okay? They can conquer people, I can rob you, but I'm not telling that, okay? It's different, okay? But PRC is different, okay? But, so anyway, now, so this is a summary, and that is there are inner people and border people, and the people in the, what you call the Tibet, today KL, was never mentioned. In other words, Tibetan people were not Qing Empire's Chinese people. And this is the very clearly the sort of the Chinese emperors or the Chinese empire's position. Now, your argument might be that, hey, you see, it's very difficult to prove that something doesn't exist. I'm trying to tell you that this doesn't exist. I can't prove that something doesn't. I can prove that something exists. I just showed it to you, right? But right now, you have to just trust me, right? You have to trust me, and you doubt out because it's just hiding maybe somewhere, right? Okay, I'll actually show. Yes, there is somewhere. Okay, where is that? Okay, you can actually see that. Okay, because if you were to go to these Chinese texts, okay, you would actually see Tibetan figures reported, and this is summarized over here in the sheet. And you have the reverse side. So, as I said, this is the earliest Chinese record of Tibetan affairs, and it's called the Tibet record, okay? And the Chinese PRC version actually explicitly says that it's anonymous, regional authors. The Taiwan version puts in the name, but then actually the scholars realize that they overly understand that this is not sort of reliable. They know where the author is, they also know where the publication year. But this book, okay, that was published around 1750, has this passage that says that, well, according to this book, which was also shared, they said, well, the Qing dynasty people apparently had this census records, and then it was inclusion in the unification record. It was not included in the unification record. You go to the unification record, there's no mention of any population figure of that. But this book claims that there is, and then it gives the figures. Okay, the figures is that under the Dalai Lama, there are so many people and so many lamas, and that is then given in this. You look at this table. This second table is over here, and so you can see. Look at this row right now. Okay, if you look at these figures, okay, so the Dalai Lama, okay, under Dalai Lama, there is so many persons, okay, and so many households, okay. These are lamas are individuals, and households are just households, okay. And so this is the figure, okay. It's also given in 1750. Okay. Now I have included only extract 2 and 4. The extract 2 is from this book. Okay, Record of Holy Conquest is a very authoritative book, again, in Qing history, and that is published in 1845, where the same set of figures are quoted. Okay, and the text is over here. Okay, it's given in extract 2, basically the same. Okay, and then in 1920, when Qing dynasty fell, and ROC, this guy, remember Zhao Xin again, the brother Zhao Feng, had this nasty job of doing this, and then how could I be not a liar, but still I also want to conform to the political pressure. Okay? So actually what happens is that he didn't put in the geography section, he put it in the second to last volume of this huge book, okay? And then also he uses exactly the same figure. And you would think that Zhao Xin knows where the real figures are, and couldn't find any. Okay, so after about 200 years, okay, the same set of figures were used. Okay? Now, but that's not the end of the story. The end of the story is that after 1949, okay, 49 of course is PRC. So these people actually they didn't tell lies. Okay, and you can see Zhao Xin was trying to be as honest as possible given his very difficult job. Okay. Now comes this is a widely-sided book, okay? And if you look at extract 4, this is from the biographies of Dalai Lama, okay? And the PRC book uses exactly the same figures that appeared more than 200 years ago. Well, by now it's more than 200 years ago. Not only that, by that time there was a political need to justify what you call the unification of Tibet. And one of the important justifications was the liberation of serfs. So you can see that actually the text says this. This guy who wrote this book says that according to this book, there were so many lamas and there were so many serfs. Now, if you look at the original text, there's no mention of serfs. These are people, okay? They're common people. What the PRC book, just did was just to change the word from people to serfs. This incidentally is one of the only 2 historical proofs of the prevalence of serfs produced by the PRC. The PRC has been telling everybody, okay, all the people educated in China knows that there's a 95% of the people in Tibet were serfs. Okay, that's the reason why we have to liberate them. Okay, and this is one of the two groups. Okay, that's it. Okay, there's so many serfs. It's even better. Anyway, so I think what I'm trying to show is that China during the Qing dynasty, even though they claim Tibet to be part of the empire, not only were they unable to get census records, they couldn't even get that figure from the Tibetan government. Okay, they have to make up those figures. Okay, and reuse it. Okay, over the 200 period. In fact, even after 1950 and after 1959, they're still using the figure and change the wording. So I don't have time to go through this. Should I stop now?
Why don't we take some questions?
Yeah.
Any questions right now? Any questions relating to anything that Professor Lau has spoken about, either Ming or Qing or anything that you guys have?
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. Well, I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. The comment is, thank you so much for your courage, for doing this and letting us know about the situation and about your research. It is very important, but I would encourage you and caution you to be careful for your person.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate support. Any more questions?
Any other? Oh, wait, hold on. Let me just- one second.
Oh, okay.
Hi,
Yeah.
Professor. So I'm just wondering how your research disproves the idea that Tibet was a vassal state of the Qing dynasty. It's not very clear to me, so would you just clarify?
Well, as I said, we need to go through all the criteria, right? Geographical records and census records, and each of those, I'm trying to prove that China had no control over Tibet. So it's just like, okay, I'll give you an example. Proving myself to be American is easy, you just produce my passport. Am I a Chinese? Okay? I read Chinese books practically every day, and most of the time of the day I read Chinese books, okay? I eat Chinese dishes, okay? Every day, my family, I speak to my wife, I eat Chinese, okay? And as educated as a Chinese, okay? In all respects, I'm a Chinese culturally, okay? But I have nothing to do with China, I was not born in China, I have no legal status with China. So, am I Chinese? You say, well, I'm 50%. You give up, nothing is absolute, okay? It's like, am I American? Well, I don't have blonde hair, I'm not a Caucasian, okay? There are some people in this country who would claim that I'm not American, even though I have an American passport. So maybe I'm 98% American, okay? So about this, 98% American, I'm 50% Chinese, okay? But anyway, so it's the same thing when it comes to whether Tibet is part of Qing Empire. It's not 0 or 100. Okay, even in my case, let's say I'm 98% American, 50% Chinese. So eventually we need to come up with a point system and consider all those criteria. Remember, we look at a whole bunch of these criteria, which of course we had no time to talk about. You have things like geographical documents, you have things like whether they can appoint judges, appoint key officials, military presence, tribute, and then we have stuff like that. And each one we have to talk about it. So far, I've been able to talk about only, not talk about, but touch on two topics. One is on geographical documents, okay? And we showed that some of the maps, it indicates that the Qing Empire didn't even care to label Tibet, but later on they then explicitly labeled Tibet as part of China. And then we then talk about this part, okay? Census records. So, no, at this point I can't really sort of argue or prove or claim that I've proven that the Tibet wasn't part of China. I'm just trying to tell about, this evidence that people can look at, and so far the evidence I've looked at is that in each of these criteria you can I should say prove, but argue convincingly that that Tibet was independent of China.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Are you sure? Okay. So maybe you have time to just talk about one topic. I'm going to change the topic, okay? Because I think today some of you have heard about the Guru massacre. Okay, so I'm going to mention the Guru massacre once more. Let me just show you this. This is a major argument of PRC. The major argument of PRC is that if you look at the white paper, okay, the authoritative summary of the PRC's argument of Chinese sovereignty over Tibet is in the white paper that was issued by the state office. Okay? And you can see that the two major arguments are that the Qing Empire was able to send a ruling administrative officer to Tibet, and it's called the Agama. Okay? The fact that China has the right to send a ruling officer means that we have the right to rule that place. Okay? I don't have time to talk about that. Actually, it's in the previous, you were talking about the empires over here, but I don't have time to talk about the second major argument. The second major argument, I really mentioned it just now very briefly, and the PRC claims that there's a Fan Yin, okay, there's a fund office, and the fund office was in charge of Mongolia and Tibet, and we have actually a special office that governs Tibet, so that proves that we were governing Tibet. So let's talk about this thing that's called the Fan region. Okay? In other words, this is again, there's no dispute. Okay? Everybody recognizes that. Is that Tibet was in the province of China, of Qing Empire, but Tibet was the Fan region, and China's position, the Fan region, okay, just like Mongolia was part of China, okay? It's just the way China was governed, okay? Some of them was internal provinces, some of them would just choose to call them Fan regions. The Chan regions are just part of China, they're all Chinese, okay? Now, what we show is that actually, the Qing Empire made it very clear that Fan regions, they don't mean part of China, they are colonial possessions, okay? And the Fan office is actually China's colonial office, and Tibet, moreover, was not even a real colony, it was a wishless colony where Mongolia was a real colony, okay? And we'll show that with, again, original sort of documents. First of all, you can see the usage, okay? This guy, I'm just going to show you just a text that are written by influential people. This guy was the ambassador of China to Great Britain, was also the teacher of English to the last emperor of China. Okay? So he knows what he's talking about in terms of translating foreign things to Chinese things. So you can see the text that he was reading. One of the books he's written, it says, several days ago, the British chief officer of the Fan, this is, of course, this is a little bit awkward because this is written in Chinese. I'm translating that into English for you. But the Chinese actually use this Fan office to refer to the British chief officer of their Fan, which the chamberlain at that time was the colonial secretary. Okay? So actually, they were referring to the British colonial office as the Fan office. In other words, they equate a Western colonial office as the Fan office. Okay? So this is another example. Of course, there are thousands of these examples. I just extracted a few. Aisin-Jero, is the name of the surname of the imperial family of Qing Dynasty. Okay? Anybody with the surname of Aisin-Jero means he's a member of the imperial family. This, of course, was the minister, or cabinet minister of industry and commerce of the Qing Dynasty during the last year of the Qing Dynasty. Okay? So this is the diary where he was going to Britain to study British governance, and so that's what he said. Singapore proposed to build a Confucian Academy. It was submitted to the government of Singapore to be forwarded to the British Fan Office for consideration. You know what I'm trying to show you is that it was standard understanding and usage at that time is that China's Fan Office is really the same as the colonial offices of these Western nations. Okay? So if you were to claim that, and this would mean that if you were to claim that Tibet was under the Fan Office, that would mean that you are actually admitting that China treated Tibet as a colony, which is a no-no, because of course the PRC, of course, condemns colonialism. Okay? So because there's no way to admit that it was a colony. Okay? Now we don't. This is too long. Okay, so I'm going to skip this. So this is just an example. Okay? You can see that Britain's own country consists of 3 islands, England, Scotland, and Ireland, and then you have India and other foreign possessions. Okay, have a population of 80 plus. So these are foreign possessions. Okay, come on. Okay, and then there's a whole bunch of other. This again, the ambassador, Chinese ambassador to the United States and to England. Okay, so these are people who know what I'm talking about. Okay? So anyway, but I'll give you some choices of translation. Okay, this is the imperial representative that is sent to Tibet after the second British invasion. Okay, so after the British retreated, then the emperor sent this guy here to find out what on earth went on. You have this British invasion force that defeated the Tibetans, and then they asked for a lot of indemnities and whatever. So this is the guy who came to Tibet to find out what was going on. Because really before that, they had no idea what was happening to Tibet, right? So let's see what he said. We must capture Tibet's governmental control as soon as possible, which means that at that time they had no governmental control. But what they're saying is that, hey, the British have come in, now that we've cheated, it's time for us to capture the governmental control. So, train soldiers and develop education. To capture governmental control, we must grasp the current window of opportunity during which Dalai Lama has yet to return. See, what happened was that before the British forces came to Lhasa and occupied Lhasa, the Dalai Lama had to Mongolia, actually. Okay, so this is a good time. Okay, we can take this opportunity, deploy 100 Army Academy graduates, surreptitiously arranged in order to be efficient, effectively what? That's what it is. Other suggestions are award Dalai and pension, honorific titles, and favorable annual stipends. As the system for the Indian farm kings, again, the word farm is used as the colonial kings, okay? Under the British colonial rule with the king ruler of the Qing farm region. Okay, in other words, they're really saying that, okay, we have to treat the Tibetans exactly the same way as British treat India. They emulate the raw particle used by the government, thus naturally establish the status of, now this is a very interesting term, I think a lot of people don't realize it. Look at this original document. Okay? The Qing Empire has never claimed to be the mother of fatherland Tibet. Zhuguo, okay, it's Chinese, it's called Zhuguo. It's never claimed to be motherland or fatherland. They've always used the term master country. It's a big difference. The wording is obvious. Okay? But let's see other suggestions. Okay? Let's skip this part. We don't have time to do it. Look at this. This is the imperial representative of Tibet, seeing, that the Dalai Lama is flat. Okay, so he's suggesting all these things. So what are the things he's suggesting? The Tibetan region covers 7,000 square miles, 7 miles in both directions. Okay, north, south, east, west. It's a huge area. Again, this animal is rocking it. But the word is firm. Okay. Her mineral deposits are unrivaled throughout the 5 continents. In future, it will definitely be our excellent colony. If managed for the right people to benefit from the right. Okay? Now, he then, after a few months, submitted another suggestion to the emperor. Okay? And you can see that. Repeated the same suggestion. This vast and sparsely populated. In future, okay, this sentence is important. It means that in future it could be a colony, but right now it's not even a colony. In other words, this statement proves 2 things. Qing Empire at that time had real control over Tibet, but the real destination intended for Tibet is, is to be exploited as a colony. Now this is a straight translation. And unfortunately, again, that's the reason I was hoping that I have some people who can read Chinese to sort of verify what I'm saying. Then I can show the Chinese version. Okay? And over here, continue to say, the Ampa, this is the Grand Officer Station in Tibet, which is the Ampa, has never taken care of government affairs and long been despised by Tibetans. Now, this is actually a Chinese imperial representative telling the emperor this. Now this, of course, is what the British are claiming all the time, what the British and Western are claiming all the time. But the PRC, of course, is denied it as rubbish. But actually, what people don't realize is that is in the Chinese records, and these things are published by the PRC. Okay, we have reprints of these documents published by the PRC. And that's what it says over here. He has no military support to suppress a peace. No, he has no power. It's just an ambassador over there. Okay, I mean, I couldn't do anything, and he's unable to participate in any governmental matters. The British ridicule us for having no sovereignty in Tibet and for our failure to fulfill the obligations of a master nation, and we indeed should feel ashamed. As for the likelihood that Tibetan authorities will resist and take over government, well, pardon me, this is just straight translation, okay? This official humbly feels that Tibetans are okay? So anyway, now, continuing the suggestion, okay? Even if there are minor, in other words, earlier on it says that, we will, have to sort of, have a coup. But then over here, then it says that, anyway, so I think we're out of time.
Yeah, we're slowly running out of time, but before we end this, I just want to make sure that if anybody has any questions, now would be a good time to ask them. Any questions at all? I'll let them go.
What was the difference between, a little bit of a digression, but after the Qing dynasty, did Sun Yat-sen and the Kuomintang take the same position that was undertaken by the Chinese government?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question once more, please? I'm a little bit hard to hear.
The argument that the Communist Chinese government gives, was that the same position taken earlier after Sun Yat-sen came to power?
Well, okay, it's actually like that. When Sun Yat-sen started working towards a revolution to overthrow the Qing government, okay, it was very clear. 推翻俘虏还我中华 Chinese, okay? It means to overthrow these barbarians and return China to us. Okay? It was a Han thing, okay? The Manchurians were the invaders, we were Han, we put. See, at that time, you have all these important, just like Li Fanyan, okay? Li Fanyan, there were no Chinese allowed, no Hans, okay? And all the important positions, they appear to be very fair, okay? They would have the minister, the top officer of each ministry, one Han and one Manchurian, sometimes one Han and one Manchurian, one Mongolian. Now, but there are hundreds of times, the Han population, so you're talking about, the chances for the Hans to get these positions. So there are a lot of discrimination, okay, a lot of discrimination. And so basically, Chen is sort of saying, hey, look, this is ridiculous, okay, and of course, he was against Peking and all kinds. Okay, so anyway, but it was very clear, it was to kick out the barbarians and Manchurians. Okay? After they won, they suddenly realized something. Now, you know that actually our slogan in China is 5 races in harmony. I don't know whether you realize it. Okay? Now, and there is the Han, the Manchurians, and then the Mongolians, and then the Beast, the Muslims, and then the Tibetans. Now, this is laughable because if you look at even the official listing by the current PRCs, and you look at all the minorities, okay, Tibetans really doesn't count as number 5, it counts, I think, number 8 or number 9. There's no reason why we want to rank Tibet as one of the 5 groups they want to harmonize. It's a real estate problem. Because when the Hans kicked out the Manchurians, they suddenly realized that if you are going to include the Hans, you lose 40% or more of China, okay? Because these people with real estate are the Greeks, the Muslims, the Xinjiang, Manchurians, the Mongols, and the Tibetans, even though it was a small number, but they were a big piece of land. But there are other minority groups, okay, such as Yizu and Zhuangzi, okay? They actually have more people than the Tibetans, but they were never mentioned because they are trapped in all these pockets, okay, in Hunan and in Guangxi or whatever. Who gives them? Anyway, so that is it. So in other words, yes, with this background, Sun Yat-sen, or rather the party, okay, the Nationalist Party eventually realized that to be patriotic to China, we have to then change our team. So immediately they start talking about kicking out the barbarians, and then they have this harmony among the 5 races. So there was a limit. Okay? It was not wrong or right, it's just they're talking about the Chinese government is going to realize that if you don't stress the harmony of 5 races, you're going to lose half of our country. Does that answer your question?
They historically, they claim historically that Tibet was part of China.
Yes, implicitly, yes. But you see, the argument was never that strong at that time because it was a mute thing, because at that time, Tibet was for all practical purposes independent, right? Because the entire Chinese army, they were defeated, they were expatriated to China through India, you know about the part, right? So after 1917, there was actually no Chinese in Tibet. Tibet was just, they kick out the empire, they kick out the merchants, they kill everything. Actually, a lot of people were killed too. I mean, well, the Tibetans killed a lot of Chinese too at that time, right? Just think it up. So there were no Chinese, there was a real issue. Okay? And then follows about these 40 years when ROC cavalry was always trying to deal with the Tibetans, asking the Tibetans to come back and say, look, why don't you join us? And we were actually talking about that. You know, they invited the Tibetans to send in delegates for the National Assembly and say we have reserved seats, you know, for the Tibetans in the National Assembly, come and join us. So it went on for another, you know, from 1911 to 1949. And finally, when the communists took over, the communists were strong enough by that time because before that there was the internal civil war, there was Japanese invasion and stuff like that. So Chiang Kai-shek and these people, okay, all we can do is to send, you know, these envoys to Tibet and of course it's a lot of Tibetans. And then finally, after the Second World War and so forth, okay, then the communists finally said, look, we don't need to talk to them anymore, and we can just go and, you know, solve the
When can we buy the book?
What?
When can we buy the book?
Oh, I'll pass the list. I don't know, as I said, every year I tell people next year, and they do it for 5 years.
So where about this book?
Yeah, but give me your address. When it's done, I'll sell you one, okay? Okay, I'll give you a discount. I'll give you a 10% discount.
And we certainly look forward to the day when we can read your book, Professor. I would be, we're going to have to end it because of time constraints. I'd be remiss in my duties as a U.S. Tibet Committee board member if I didn't also point out that we have a donation box over there by the coffee. So those who are feeling generous, please, if you could, give a little donation for us. And if you would like to, because we are a charity organization, if you would like to get a receipt for your donation for tax purposes, you just have to let me know because I will need your contact information to send you a receipt for your donation. But I leave it over there for you. First, I'd like to thank Tibet House for allowing us to host this place. And I'd like to thank Tibet National Congress and those who here who have live streamed it. And I understand at some point it's also for those who are not here, who can't be here to watch it, that it's going to be available on YouTube at some point. So hopefully we get that information out. And we're very honored and very grateful to have Professor Lau come here from California to give us this speech, which is very fascinating to me as an amateur historian, but I think to not just the Tibetans, but also hopefully this message will go out to the greater Chinese audience, who are really the ones that is the intended audience for Professor Lau's research, to show them that what the actual historical records are, without any sort of political bias about whether or not Tibet should be independent now. It's just about what was actual history, so that we can, if you're going to have discussions about what to do now, at least you have to know what the real history is. And without the real history, then we're never going to really have a good solution for the Tibetan issue today. So thank you, Professor Lau.
Well, thank you very much. Let me add one request then. If you are interested in seeing the completion of my book, a bottleneck is to translate my Chinese. I'm writing a book in Chinese because it's always a Chinese language. So I need to translate it in English, okay? And I need help in the translation, okay? So the people over here have time to help me to refine my drafts in English, or to translate from Chinese to English, or to be a critical reader of my English drafts or manuscript, let me know. So, thank you very much. Oh, that's the answer.